Welcome to Episcopals, the public witness podcast where we bring awareness to pressing public policy issues, civic engagement, and help bring your faith into the public square. I'm your host, Alan Yarborough, Director of Government Relations and Global Partnerships for the Episcopal Church. All right, so we're here with Lindsay Delks again, our domestic policy advisor, back on the show today. This is great to have you.
Well, it's good to be here.
So before we get into some subject detail talking about gun reform and addressing gun violence, I'm curious what motivates you to be a part of this work.
The interesting thing about gun violence is that it has no particular group that it affects. It has no particular city. It has no particular east or west coast, no particular neighborhood. Everyone has and can be affected by gun violence. It has become one of the most pressing issues because of that, because people on every part of this country can relate to that, and they can relate to the experience. And so I think that is why it has become one of the more prolific issues of our time.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's unfortunate, but that makes sense. Given recent events, given your answer there, this is sort of a bit of an obvious question for some, but I think is still helpful for the framing. Why does addressing the issue of gun violence matter? Why is this important?
Gun violence continues to be very high on the list of the cause of death for both adults and young adults. As we continue to talk, I think public safety is one of the most important things that most people care about. The ability to go out in public and feel safe, the ability to feel safe in your own home. People just like the security. And when there is an issue of gun violence, it questions that security, and it questions the security that you have for your friends and your family. And I think that the kind of undue stress of that is what leads a lot of people to feeling like we must address this, as soon as possible.
When we do advocacy trainings and sort of offerings from our office and in daily practice in our work, we talk about vocabulary being so important, the language for conveying truth, for accuracy, but also making sure that our message is heard, that words carry certain baggage or have a certain implication that might lead to misunderstandings, might lead to us talking past one another. That's really just so critical for this work when we're talking across differences of opinion and perspective. So can't do everything, an exhaustive look here, of course, but I'm wondering if you could speak a bit to the importance of language on this topic and maybe a couple of examples.
Definitely. So I think one of the first examples that I think of is kind of the conversation between like automatic weapons and semi-automatic weapons, as well as like assault rifles. Semi-automatic weapon is one that you would find pretty regularly at like a gun show or in a gun store. Those are weapons that can fire once when trigger is pulled. An automatic weapon, counter to that, is a weapon that can be fired multiple rounds can be fired from one trigger pull. Automatic weapons are pretty much reserved only for military and police. There's a couple of exceptions if they were registered between, I believe, 1930 and like 1970. And so we don't typically see automatic weapons as much as we see a semi-automatic weapons. Assault rifles, kind of in addition to that, are weapons that tend to have switches. And so they can be switched from semi-automatic to automatic to what's called like burst firing. AR-15, kind of in addition to that, does not mean assault rifle. It stands for Armalite, and that is the original creator of the weapon. And so I think just kind of clearing up what language means what and kind of what that means for the actual type of weapon that you're referencing to.
Yeah. No, that's important. And to show that, when we're advocating for something for policy, it's the right policy. Right. When we're talking to somebody that cares about this topic, we're approaching that with a sense of, respect is perhaps an odd word to use, but showing that knowledge base, that connection through using the right vocabulary, talking about the same thing is really important. What actions, positive and negative, have happened on gun reform in the last few years?
So we did get a bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which did a little bit for gun reform under the Biden administration. Under the current Trump administration, there has been a very big push to protect the Second Amendment and to kind of reject policies that may inhibit people to enjoy the full access of that amendment. There have been policies such as supporting the constitutional right to concealed carry, which is legislation that would basically make it to where concealed carry licenses would be accepted in every state across state borders, sort of like a driver's license, which kind of overrules whatever state law may be in place. There's also been a settling of a lawsuit that was brought against the prior administration that makes legal force reset triggers, which are essentially triggers that reset after every pull, which allow semi-automatic weapons to become automatic weapons. There are some steps that have been taken that, we obviously view it as kind of dangerous to the public safety viewpoint.
And I know your portfolio and your focus in our advocacy is domestic, but you bringing up that the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act reminds me of some of the international implications. So in leading our foreign policy advocacy to Haiti, that's become relevant in looking at arms trafficking throughout the Caribbean, and something that's been a key driver of insecurity in Haiti in particular. There were some products out of that bill that actually were implemented in that region to help address arms trafficking in Haiti. In terms of the Episcopal Church speaking out, we reference our General Convention resolutions all the time on a daily basis ourselves, and encourage Episcopalians to learn what the church has said in that way. Last year, there was a resolution about the situation in Haiti that names arms trafficking as an issue to address. But back to the domestic side, back to your portfolio. What has the church said about gun reform elsewhere?
A ton. So we had our first gun reform resolution, introduced back in the 70s. And since then, we've probably had about like 24 various resolutions that address various parts of what goes into kind of our gun violence crisis. So everything from community violence intervention funding to mental health resources. I mean, we have pretty much everything covered. Obviously, assault weapons. And so we have a good base of resolutions. We have probably about 24 of them that address gun violence specifically.
It's been something that the church has spoken out about for quite some time. So we have action alerts, these chances to write Congress, for people in the church to write Congress and build a relationship, hopefully, with their representatives. Do we have one on gun reform? What is the one on, or maybe we have multiple? I know sometimes we have several on this topic. Where are we at with action alerts on gun reform?
We definitely have one on gun reform. Broadly, we've had one in the past on safe storage. There is a push and a legislative push for a law called Ethan's Law, which would make it a legal requirement to store weapons safely. And the most safe way that people have found to store weapons is locked away with the ammunition and the actual weapons separate from each other. And we also have a general gun violence alert that just urges us to bring the issue to the attention of Congress. Gun violence doesn't have to be an inevitable. We can definitely take steps to ensure that everyone has that feeling of safety, as I mentioned earlier.
Sort of the way you broke that down reminds me too of, the more jarring visuals of gun violence as sort of the mass shootings or the targeted, political violence. But it's also about violence in the home and even just mistakes and accidents that happen. Is that right?
There's definitely an unintentional shooting impact, which, as I mentioned, continues to be one of the leading causes of death, especially for young people. There is the issue of suicide and self-harm as it relates to guns. So there's definitely a world of kind of gun violence outside of, like you said, the violence that we are traditionally accustomed to.
Yeah. And do you find that the complexities there in this topic, is that a window of opportunity to engage people across the political spectrum?
Definitely. I think my father is a hunter, and so he obviously has a lot of weapons. And I think, especially for someone like him who legally owns weapons, he wants to keep not only himself safe, but his family safe, and, doesn't want it to ever be a barrier to having, his nieces and nephews and grandkids around. And so I think that there's definitely people who feel empowered kind of by the message of just keeping people safe, even in your home. I think that is definitely a message that resonates.
Yeah. Well, we, of course, hope people will take action using our action alert. But there are, as with other issues we cover, there are a lot of other organizations out there that focus on gun reform and gun safety, ending gun violence. I wonder if you could talk about a couple of those.
Definitely. I think you have the big ones, Moms of Man Action and Brady's and Every Town Against Gun Violence. There are also several organizations who will take gun parts and transform them into garden parts, which I think is a very, very cool initiative. There are a wide variety of organizations that do work. I would also add organizations that work to prevent gun violence. So community-based organizations that may interact with youth or may interact with people who are transitioning out of incarceration, or just people who have a high risk to either be victims of or commit gun violence crimes. And so I do think those are great places to partner as well.
Well, thank you for speaking about this. It's a heavy topic. It's one that comes up in the news far too frequently. So I know that many in the public are used to hearing about it, but may not get this background and see these opportunities where they can engage and speak out. So thanks for providing that today.
Thank you for the platform.
Thank you for joining us. Stay involved through the Episcopal Public Policy Network and browse our action alerts at iam.ec/action. In our next episode, we will talk about ways that you can say no to expanding immigration detention.